Hi everyone, welcome to a presentation by the International Human Rights Society. I'm honored to introduce Peter Jacob, who will be presenting a talk on the human rights situation in Pakistan. And I believe Mustafa Ahmed will also be answering questions at the end of the talk. Afterwards, we'll have elections, so I hope you can stick around and stay if you're interested in running for a position. And thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thanks very much, Ahmed. And thanks everybody for coming for this briefing on the situation in Pakistan. 32 years ago, when I first came to United States, not many people knew where Pakistan was, or whether it was a country or a town or something. One fellow that I happened to visit thought it was a small town located somewhere close to New Jersey. Then we discovered it was not Pakistan, it was Pakistan. So, but now Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, these are countries, India of course, very important, China, that everybody is familiar with now that when we talk about people in the street here in US also, people know where Pakistan is. We will especially focus on the situation of religious minority to look at what implications there are of having a religious economy, because Pakistan has this distinct feature of being a religious or theocratic state. So let me begin with the geography. Pakistan came into existence after a demand in the United India, ruled by British, that a Muslim minority had a fear that with Hindu majority they may not be able to have their rights equal as to common citizens, so they needed a separate homeland. So the territories now part of Bangladesh and Pakistan, they became a separate country. Still, you can't see that properly, but our flag had a white part which represented religious minorities. So the founders of the country, they had this sensitivity that even though the country was being carved out of fear and on the identity of religious minority then, it had Thank you. It is bound to have religious minorities, and they must have some place in the constitution, in the ethos of the country. So the flag had this white part, which is 30% of the total flag, which represented the number of minorities at that time. It was 30%, close to 30% when the country was carved out. It became an independent state, but now there are only 4% of religious minorities, which reflects some of the migration that took place basically to India in the 1947 and afterwards. And then because of some of the trends that we are going to discuss about restrictions and hostilities that exist, there is a continuous migration. But not only the minorities, majority community also happens to be migrating. About 10 million people at this point, Pakistani citizens, live out of Pakistan for different reasons. Professionals, there is that famous thing of brain drain, that is also happening. Let us look at some of the positive and negative things. And we call this a paradox, excellent paradox, typically, because it has contradicting trends existing. The country has so many strengths as well as weaknesses. It is a nuclear power declared, 6th largest population, 8th largest army, 21%, I don't know how many countries there are where you will have 21% representation of women in the parliament, national as well as provincial assemblies. But there is reserved for women that they will have. The country has about 26th largest economy, whereas 34th largest territory. But at the same time, the literacy rate is 53%. This is shamefully low. And poverty, of course, it ranks, like it says, 146th in the Human Rights Index. And then you have a highest maternal mortality rate, which reflects the health conditions. Per capita income is not bad. It is not bad. I have placed this among the negative things, but it is not bad as compared to some other countries. Gender inequality, and then, of course, security situation is very bad. One of the key features of the polity is that it has a very strong army which has ruled Pakistan for nearly 4 decades. But that's not bad if you compare it with the countries which had, prolonged military rules like 30 to 40 years, some places. So there were at the same time always a strong urge in the society to have democratic system. So every dictator was made to leave because there was a popular movement, political and civil rights were always on the agenda. And even though at one time military dictators, they had to imprison people like 25,000 political workers at a time, and 4,000 political workers being punished with severe penalties and punishments like flogging in public. The democracy is back. This is an important feature of the, but still army is still very strong. Another feature that you see in everyday media coverage is that the country has very dangerous, so to say, militancy. While they control territories with gunpower, they have their allies controlling the streets as well, so street power as well. Looking at what is behind the religious extremism, because as keen readers of international affairs, we know that Pakistan had links with several of extremist terrorist activities going on throughout the world. Religious extremism, first reason which we are going to discuss a little bit further, is that the country chose to become a religious economy, religious state. Feudal and tribal values also have convergences and shared areas with some other aspects of religious economy or theocracy. Then, of course, due to colonial past, democratic institutions or political institutions, they were underdeveloped, and sometimes politicians made mistakes which made an atmosphere allowing military to take over, allowing military to continue wielding influence in the politics, and which is my last point also. This concept of religious economy is rather old, and there is some further research done. But what is a religious economy? It is a concept opposed to political economy, based on equality, fraternity, and liberty values and aspirations. This is to show where a country chooses to influence religion or impact religion somehow, and vice versa, because then the clergy of that country, they never stop to urge sharing power more than they are given. So it happens on both sides. In this presumption, when a religious economy is formed, a religious state is formed, it has to choose a majority faith to align with. That means naturally that minority faith groups will be marginalized. When that happens, a religious monopoly is created. I believe this is not only in Pakistan, many other countries, I don't want to name, but there are other countries which chose to be a religious economy. A monopoly is formed, and then smaller groups, smaller faith groups are marginalized. As a result of this marginalization, persecution or hostility against minorities becomes economically benefit in the form of taking over control of properties, propaganda machineries. Also, they generate propaganda which sells, which creates benefits, and then finally a commodification of religion takes place. Ultimately, it is not only the minority groups, the majority group also suffers. The same application we will see in examples also. Why is this happening? Okay. Further theorization, which I'm working on, and I got very interested in Pew analysis and Pew statistics, which were gathered for about over 190 countries to study how the relationship between state and religion was functioning, and it became possible to show empirically that state restrictions naturally create more hostilities, social hostilities among the society towards minority groups that we are talking about. It can be new religions, it can be smaller sects, it can be other religious minorities. And that is what forms a cycle of violence, and it becomes a religious persecution. Basically, Brian Grimm, who is director of Georgetown Center for Religion, he collaborated with Professor Roger Finke of University of Philadelphia, and they have come up with the research. They have continuously done researches and brought down publications. The one that I looked deeply into was the price of religious freedom denied. One example that we can see in Pakistan's legal and political system is blasphemy laws. Besides other laws, for instance, non-Muslims, whoever declared, cannot become president of the country, prime minister of the country, other discriminations which are institutionalized. Blasphemy laws are a spike, so to say. So looking at these laws were introduced between 1980 to 1986, again by a military dictator. So these laws, you keep hearing about some abuses of human rights because of these laws. Let's look at what are these laws. So parts of Pakistan Penal Code Section 298A, for instance, introduced has punishment for 2 years imprisonment and fine, which is offering any insult or disrespect to the family members, companion, caliphs, and wives of the Prophet Muhammad. Second is offering any insult or to Holy Quran, and then 2 sections which are Ahmadi specific, that they cannot propagate their faith. This was a sect declared as non-Muslims in 1974. So people who it's small population, smaller population, but not insignificant. There have been members of this community who were ministers. The first foreign minister came from this community, and very important services rendered by this community, but they were declared non-Muslims. So two sections of the Pakistan Penal Code declare them not only, they were declared non-Muslims constitutionally in the Constitution. But here the Penal Code has some restrictions as to propagation of their faith or calling themselves a Muslim. The law says posing themselves as Muslims. So another kind of derogatory formulation. But finally, there came 295C, a section of the Penal Code that is widely abused. It is about showing any disrespect to Prophet Muhammad. We'll discuss this a bit further, but the objections about these laws are, number one, that they are religion specific. They are not for everybody, not all citizens equal. Second, the punishments somehow are excessive. They are out of proportion. We are studying about, Professor Kasser's class, we study this, proportionate use of punishment. So the punishments are out of proportion. Death and life imprisonment and 3 years. Now, coming back to issues in religious economy, blasphemy law is just one spike, one height that shows and that reflects religious discrimination and a form of restriction as well as hostility, showing hostility institutionalized. But there are other laws also. So what you see in a religious economy is that discriminations are institutionalized, policies and laws, where in case of Pakistan you see blasphemy laws, there are reports of forced conversions also, biased education system, we will talk about this a little further. And then you see other examples. For instance, Pakistan had very specific, it was called a separate electorate. Like if you happen to be Muslim, you will only vote for Muslim, and if you are Hindu and Ahmadi and Christian, you are going to vote for your own so-called own representatives, and you cannot vote for beyond your religious identity on the basis of adult franchise. So in the religious economies, there is a trend that in order to show some representation of the minorities, I know there is at least this system in other countries also, but you see the economies claiming to be religious state have this. Then you have social exclusion and economic marginalization. This graph shows, this is to show just a pattern of attacks, what kind of hostilities there are and there exist. Of course, the highest was terrorism. This is in case of Pakistan, because we also think that religion-based extremism has translated itself to terrorism, because it starts with, state patronizing small, so to say, benign political representation in the name of other identities, restrictions, basically restrictions, and they ultimately result into the violence. The cycle of violence continuing becomes so extreme that it turns out to be like this. But it's just, as I said, Pakistan is not the only example, only that it is one of very interesting examples and very sad examples, so to say, to study. So terrorism is one that is aimed at minorities. And we will further see this is about religious minorities, but there are religious sects who happen to be minority, and they are targeted too. So land grabbing, evictions, terrorism, hate crimes, and blasphemy, these are the trends. This slide shows the victims of by category of their communities. And you can see that Muslims, who happen to be majority, also become not only victims, but the highest number. The highest number of victims comes from Muslim community. You can still argue that proportionately religious minorities are still largest sufferers, biggest victims. But still, why a law which is specifically designed to protect honor and respect of majority religion should have these many victims from the majority community itself? So another contradiction, another conflict. Here is something where in my study, because I took this subject for my research paper, the situation in Pakistan at some point challenged the theory presented by Grimm and Finke. They were saying that restrictions causing so more social hostilities form into a cycle, and the cycle continues, and which demands further restrictions because then it becomes a need of the society, becomes a religious economy. Persecution is economically beneficial. But here, even when the restrictions stop, and some of the laws, they are curtailed down, some procedures were placed to check the abuses, the hostilities do not come down again. And here I wanted to show that sometimes when the restrictions and hostilities form a cycle, you don't need any more investment in shape of restrictions or hostilities. They become self-generative and they continue victimizing people. This chart shows a comparison of fatalities and injured people in bomb blast, attack on places of worship, Hindus, Ahmadis, Christians, but also, most importantly, Shia Muslims. Shia is a minority sect among Muslims. And since the concept of blasphemy further grows into more demands of, more inclinations of declaring people apostate, not belonging to, not exactly Muslim, not rightly Christian, not right Christian. I mean, this fundamentalism, as you can say. So the fatalities and injured here in this were basically Shia, mostly Shia Muslims. Now, in order to show that how this indoctrination agenda or transmitting of the values that were first introduced by a state choice continue to groom new hostilities among the young generations. Education system is widely used by the states, especially the theocratic states, to perpetuate this position. So, for instance, in case of Pakistan, our education system does not allow any other religion to be taught except one majority religion. Second, it's a compulsory subject. Then there are some incentives attached to taking Islamia or Islamic studies. 20 extra marks for admissions as well as government jobs. So these are some of the incentives and disincentives, but of course, most important is the biases transmitted through syllabi, through curriculum into the young students, young generation. These biases are about, omissions, omitting any mention of other religions, so to create a monolithic mindset and picture of Pakistan, that it's a country of, and not as our flag reflected here, that there were religious minorities also. Negative portrayal of other religions, twisting of historical facts. The last one I think is common about most countries. Twisting of history is very common. This is just a sketch that shows how. In fact, this was a textbook analysis that Nabila worked on. I also worked on. Some other people going line by line. So one of the ways that civil society engages itself in response to such situation is to analyze the text and then bring it to media and government so that something can be done. Response from human rights lawyers, defenders. Of course, lawyers all around, they are always on the forefront in the movements for rights and democracy. But Pakistan also has large share of lawyers participating in. I don't know many examples though, where judiciary, large parts of judiciary, we had dictatorships in many countries, as you know. Religious economy is also not uncommon. But Pakistan was, I think, only country where judiciary was dislodged. Among 130 lawyers, 30 judges, 60 were removed by a military dictator. And there starts a lawyers' movement for restoration of democracy and judiciary. 2007, there was a huge movement, and that is what resulted in end of General Pervez Musharraf's regime. So lawyers have been very, very active. At the same time, it was very important that international lawyers community, so to say, the international bar, especially the American bar, they were very supportive, so to say, not only by issuing statement in favor of, but also they invited the senior members of lawyers movement here to United States, where they were able to tell the story, because at that time, as you know, United States, closely allied with Pakistan, they were somehow supportive of Musharraf regime. It was important to tell American ally at that time that it was not in favor of Pakistan. I don't know any other example. Pakistan's Chief Justice, he was also honored in United States. So that kind of, and the lawyers for lawyers based in Hague, they were very supportive. That's where we took our strength from. Then lawyers, but society also engaged in, we are studying Professor Sean's class these days, how to engage in UN-based advocacy. So we have prepared some shadow reports for CEDAW, CRC, SED, UPR reports twice. International advocacy and protection are also the means which were adopted in response to these hostilities and struggle for democracy and human rights. Lawyers, of course, in Pakistan also engage in litigation on a case-to-case basis. Human rights abuses are monitored. Public interest litigation is also something very common. One important thing that civil society in Pakistan is peculiar about, that they understand the centrality of minorities, because this is a dividing factor in our polity. Civil society has been very conscious that they need to include minorities or re-include them as they were separated. So they understand the centrality of minorities' rights in the struggle for democracy and rights. At the same time, since very beginning, even before Pakistan came into existence, very movement for Pakistan during the British rule, people were opposing this idea, and people are, in a nice way, people are continuing to develop a counter narrative to the religious economy. So it's not that the society is also monolithic like the state wants it to be, but it is a continuous exercise to develop a counter narrative of religious economy. These are two pictures, one lawyer, one journalist. Mr. Raza Rumi on the right, he's a senior journalist, a columnist, anchor person, a blogger. This is a picture when he was attacked, assassination attack, when he was sitting in his car last month. He survived luckily, but the driver lost his life. Mr. Rashid Rahman, he's a lawyer, was defending a case against against a person. Basically, he's a lecturer. He was accused of having committed blasphemy. Now, last week, he was threatened, and he is now under great risk, I would say. Just to show you how the society, especially the lawyers community and civil society, are struggling. We cannot finish our talk about mentioning this lady. I hope some of you understand, some of you know this picture. With difficulty maybe, let me tell you, she's Malala Yousafzai. Malala, 14, at the age of 13, she started writing. When Taliban occupied her district where she was living and she could no more go to school, she was shot at by Taliban because she was writing for BBC and other. She couldn't go to school. Very good, very nice parents. Father especially was a teacher. She was shot at and under very special circumstances. She was transferred to England to have a treatment while she was unconscious, basically. And she is back. She has been honored by United Nations. She made a speech at United Nations, and she's been awarded several times. Even she was nominated for Nobel Prize this year, last year. Malala is not the only one. This young man is Itazaz Hussain, age 15, student. He tried to overpower a suicide bomber when the suicide bomber came to attack the school he was studying. So other students inside, he was at the gate. When he realized that he was in front of a suicide bomber, he tried to catch him, lost his life. That's his father and relatives mourning as well as agitating. Just to show you that it is not being unchallenged. It's not going unchallenged. Whatever is happening in the wake of religious economy, say religious hostilities and violence, it is being challenged by not only police and army, but it's being challenged by common people also. This is just a picture to show that people are waging their struggle, people are into struggle for different kinds, labor, livelihood, health, education. Last slide. And I don't know why I'm not able to have that. Mustafa, can you help me? I need to show. इसको जरा या अब ये सही ट्रेन नजर आ रही है सही हाँ now it is. This is a train in Pakistan, though I think it is not only in Pakistan that people to stuff whatever means of transportation there are. You don't see the whole picture somehow, but it shows at least some of the aspects you can reflect on. Looking at this picture, nobody can deny that Pakistan has a population of 190 million people. The other reflection that I have is that people are inclined to use technology. It is not a regular feature. It's not casual. It must be a special occasion. As we say, it cannot be a fast train. It must be a slow-moving local passenger train. So in this very extraordinary situation that Pakistan is facing, people are inclined to use whatever means they have. People want to move ahead. You can call it train to democracy if you like. But see that people, are resilient, are not afraid. So many people boarding this train cannot be without cooperation, great cooperation, great accommodation, flexibility. And as you can say, they are not angry, they are not, they are laughing at least. So that is what Pakistan is. I think we have great difficulties, weaknesses. We have some very extraordinary plus positive aspects and characteristics. Still, I think what can be learned is that nations can drag behind. They can lag behind progress and development if they happen to choose wrong laws, wrong policies, wrong frameworks. I will end here. My colleague Mustafa Ahmed will respond to any questions that you might have, and I would like to finish with invitation that if you happen to be in that part, Pakistan is not only from distance a good example to look at. Please come and see. Thank you. Yes, Professor.
When you do your UN advocacy, who are your allies at the United Nations? What countries especially tend to be the ones that are sympathetic to your interventions? And
Thank you so much, Professor. Many European countries, especially Scandinavian countries, they've been very receptive. They make their presence, do monitor through their missions, especially they're sensitive about women's rights, children's rights, labor rights also. So they are the ones who would mostly take position in Human Rights Council, for instance, ask questions. So these are the ones. Yes, Delara.
My question is about Malala. In the news, I heard that her work was banned in some districts in Pakistan. I don't understand why it was. Were there any controversy about the state or something?
Yes, this is unfortunately true, that there is unofficial ban on her book. Some political parties, and because they form the government also. And this is how you can see the same reasons. Oh, would you like to, Mustafa? Please, this is your question.
There has been, Malala has sort of become a figure of controversy lately in Pakistan. She's seen by many as the ideas she's sort of propagating is seen by, well, I shouldn't say many, but by some who wield an unproportionate amount of power as being sort of going against some of the conservative norms in the country. So she has become a bit of a controversy figure, especially since she's now not Pakistan and she's sort of saying things that are unpopular with the government and with certain political parties. So there's no official ban, but yes, in some districts, Malala's book is no longer available.
My question is about Ahmed. I don't understand why they're not considered by the government to be Muslims. I mean, are they considered to be some kind of security threat?
No, okay. So this is a long history, but a brief history. In 1974, the Ahmadis, by a democratically elected government at the time, were declared non-Muslim. Their beliefs are deemed by Muslims to be, I shouldn't say by Muslims, but by the government at the time to be heretical, because they have a slightly different view on the finality of the prophethood, which is deemed to be a central tenet of Islam. So on the basis of a certain amount of pressure from religious groups, as well as some foreign countries, in 1974, they were declared non-Muslim, and in 1984, later on, they were that was also criminalized. So some of the sections you saw, 295B and C, I think, or 298, are related to, specifically related to Ahmadis. Amanda?
Thank you, Pisa, for the presentation. It was very informative. I just want to ask on the blasphemy point, like what sort of blasphemous conduct is the government penalize people for? Like are they sort of like freedom of expression problems? Like can one, for instance, have like a cartoon about the prophet? What sort of consequences are there, or is it just that you can't basically say anything bad about the Quran or the prophet? Like are they restrictions in relation to
I'm just,
freedom of expression?
okay.
What's the tension there?
So I'm going to go back to this slide that Peter had. Okay, so these are the basic provisions of the blasphemy law. These were also introduced during military rule by General Ziaullah. This was part of the Islamicization of the laws in the 1980s. There are different categories and there are different penalties, but basically anything against the Prophet, anything against the Quran, anything against the companions of the Prophet are all criminal offenses, for which you can go to jail, for which you can have imprisonment, or for saying something insultive against the Prophet can actually go as far as carrying the death penalty. In most cases, these are used as a tool of harassment or as a tool of to sort of settle personal debts and personal scores. So a lot of the times you hear about ridiculous cases about children, a 9-year-old kid recently who was involved in a blasphemy case, and people who are mentally unstable. And this has been particularly controversial in Pakistan because a few years ago, the governor of one of the provinces of Pakistan, Salman Taseer, took up the defense of a particular blasphemy victim who was in jail because of this. And he gained a lot of, there was a lot of opposition to his support for this victim. And he was eventually assassinated in 2011?
Yes.
2011. by his own bodyguard because of this cause he'd taken up. So it's a pretty controversial issue. There is a lot of freedom of expression issues, and the blasphemy laws currently in place in Pakistan are amongst the most severe anywhere. Andrea?
For instance, for the Ahmed incident, it said before that they cannot promote their beliefs. Is the promotion of their beliefs has the government considered blasphemy, like within the beliefs of this group?
Okay, so there are a couple of provisions governing Ahmadis. This is one of them. So promotion of belief, so any activity of preaching would be considered to be blasphemous. Then there are other criminal provisions as well. So Ahmadis, I mean, because Ahmadis look and seem so much like Muslims, this is an effort by the government to sort of distinguish them from everyone else, from the Muslim population. So they aren't allowed to call their mosques mosques. They're supposed to be places of worship. They aren't allowed to give the call for prayer. They aren't allowed to use some of the traditional greetings that Muslims use to greet each other. So these are all sort of provisions, and they all carry various criminal penalties. So these are all provisions that are used by the state to distinguish Ahmadis and to sort of prevent them from preaching their faith and their religion. Yes, ma'am.
One more question. Like, I'm not sure if Peter was talking about the discrimination or biases between religions, and Muslim religions seem to get more benefits. Like in the beginning, he was explaining the whole flag thing. I might have missed it, but from what I understood, he was saying the white area was basically saying that all the other religious minorities should also be protected within the country. The country embraces them. What sort of was the change in from the conception of the flag to now where the Muslim religion basically gets more benefits than the other religions, from what I understand?
Okay, you can, or do you want? Okay, so initially the pro-Islamic, the sort of right-wing Islamic parties were opposed to the conception of partition. They wanted a united India independent from the British. So they were opposed to the very idea of the creation of Pakistan. So they were never in sort of the implementation stages until right towards the end, where they switched ships and they joined into the idea of partition. The constitution that's currently in place in Pakistan was drafted in 1973, and the constitution itself at the time did not contain a binding provision, making the religion of Islam a binding part of the way the state runs. That was introduced later when the preamble of the constitution became a binding part of the constitution. So in the beginning stages of Pakistan, it was meant to be a state where religious minorities were protected, because at the time there was, I think, more, right before partition, you have to sort of picture this in 1947, when there were a lot of religious minorities still living in Punjab. So there was a lot of Sikh families that migrated in 1 or 2 years after the partition over to the other side of the border, to India. So in the beginning stages, this was, it wasn't, the driving force of Islam wasn't as strong that it became in later years. A lot of it was under military rule. So when General Ziaul-Haq took over in 1973? 77, sorry, it's way off there. So 77, a lot of these rules became, he sort of started this Islamicization process where the constitution was changed, where these provisions were introduced, where all these Islamic provisions were introduced into the books which weren't previously there. Blasphemy, ironically, was already there. This was actually introduced by the colonial government. So this was introduced by the British. It wasn't specific to Islam at the time, but it was a general provision that's always been in the penal code.
So we have time for perhaps 1 or 2 more questions.
Sorry, do you want to add to that, Peter? Since it was
Just that, you see, reading the developments in Pakistan together with the theory presented by Grim and Finke, is that the restrictions, any restrictions placed, even the country, started with very democratic ethos or very democratic ideals. When they start restricting one group, they end up with loss of freedom for everyone. this is something that has happened in Pakistan also. That started with isolating, persecuting with small group, non-Muslims, and declaring one Muslim smaller sect as non-Muslim, and then we go on to Shias, who happen to be like 20 to 25% of the population. So most of those attacks, hostilities are taking place against Shias now, though of course everybody is suffering. So the violence, the phenomena of violence in the name of religion engulfs everyone, engulfs the country. That is what I wanted to show.
Do we have a last question? Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
And I must apologize to Peter. I didn't give him a proper introduction earlier. He's had over 3 decades of experience working in research and advocacy in Pakistan. He's presented before the UN, I believe, and the EU as well, and has been published numerous times in newspapers, journals, and books. But thank you all for coming, and